When I left the orphanage, they told me I owned nothing, only the address to an abandoned farm. What I found there wasn't just dirt and broken fences. It was a choice that would define the rest of my life. If you've ever felt like you were starting from absolute zero, with nothing but a key to a future you couldn't even imagine, then you know a piece of this story already. Stick around, because this is about more than just an old house. And if you've ever had to fight for your own story, consider subscribing. This is a place for people like us. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to exist, at least for the state of Illinois. For 18 years, I had been a file in a cabinet, a line item in a budget, a name on a list. Leo. Just Leo. No last name they ever gave me felt like my own. Now, I was just a ghost being politely exorcised from the only home I'd ever known. Mrs. Gable, the director of the St. Jude's Home for Boys, stood on the top step, her arms crossed, her face set in that familiar mask of professional sympathy. It was a look that said, "I feel for your situation, but my shift ends in 5 minutes." The air was cold for October, a biting wind that sliced right through my thin jacket, the one they'd issued me from the donation pile. It smelled of mothballs and someone else's history. "Everything you need is in the envelope, Leo," she said, her voice as crisp as the dying leaves skittering across the cracked pavement. "Your birth certificate, your social security card, and the final disbursement from your state account. It's not much, but it's a start." I clutched the manila envelope. It felt flimsy, impossibly light for something that was supposed to contain a future. Inside, I knew, was $482. 18 years of my life, valued at less than a new television. And one other thing, a folded, yellowed piece of paper, a deed. "And the property?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I'd been told about it a week ago, a formality in a long list of out-processing procedures. It felt like a joke then, and it felt like one now. Mrs. Gable sighed, a little puff of white in the cold air. As I explained, "It's an inheritance from your grandmother. The property has been in legal limbo since her passing, and since you were a minor, it was held in trust. The taxes are significantly in arrears. The state recommends you sell the land to the county for the balance owed. It would be the simplest way to resolve it. You might even walk away with a few hundred extra dollars. The simplest way. That was the language of the system. The simplest way was to sign the form, take the check, and disappear. Become someone else's problem." I looked down at the envelope. My grandmother, a woman I couldn't even picture. My file said she had surrendered me to the state when I was 2, after my parents died. The reason listed was inability to provide care. It was a sterile, clean phrase that had always felt like a betrayal. She couldn't provide care, so she had given me away. To a life measured in paperwork and shared bedrooms. "There's a key in there, too," Mrs. Gable added, already turning to go back inside, back to the warmth. "The address is on the deed. Good luck, Leo." The heavy oak door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the sudden, profound silence. Good luck. The words hung in the air, as empty as the pockets of my jacket. I stood there for a long time, just me and the wind and the imposing brick building that had been my whole world. I was free. That's what they told me. But it felt more like I had just been unplugged. The journey to the farm was a lesson in shrinking worlds. I took a city bus to the main terminal, a chaotic cathedral of echoing announcements and the smell of diesel and despair. From there, a Greyhound bus, its windows grimy with the ghosts of 1,000 journeys, carried me out of the city's concrete embrace. I watched the skyscrapers recede, replaced by suburbs, then by strip malls, then by endless, flat fields of harvested corn under a bruised purple sky. The landscape grew emptier with every passing mile. The other passengers were like me, it seemed, people in between places, either running from something or running toward nothing at all. Hours later, the driver called out a name that sounded like a cough. Cricklewood. That was my stop. He pulled over at a literal crossroads, marked only by a leaning stop sign and a rusted mailbox. There was no station, no shelter, no town in sight, just 2 roads intersecting in a sea of brown, barren earth. "You sure this is it, kid?" the driver asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. There was a flicker of something in them, pity, maybe. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. I grabbed my single duffel bag, the sum total of my worldly possessions, and stepped down onto the gravel shoulder. The bus hissed and pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the twilight until they were gone, leaving me in a silence so complete it rang in my ears. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The address on the deed was for a place on Black Creek Road. According to the map on my phone, which had 1 bar of service, the road was a mile-long dirt track leading off this main intersection. A cold dread, heavy and real, began to settle in my stomach. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in strokes of orange and blood red. The temperature was dropping fast. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking. The road was more mud than dirt, and my cheap sneakers were soon soaked through. The wind howled across the open fields, a lonely, mournful sound. There were no lights, no signs of life, just the skeletal shapes of trees against the darkening sky. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. For the first time, the abstract fear of the future became a very real, physical thing. What was I walking toward? What kind of person leaves a child a place like this? It felt less like an inheritance and more like a punishment. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A dark shape looming against the sky, set back from the road. A mailbox, tilted on its post like a tired old man, had the name Blackwood barely visible under layers of rust and peeling paint. My grandmother's name. My name, I supposed. I turned onto the driveway, a pair of muddy ruts overgrown with weeds. The house was a silhouette, a slumped, 2-story shape with a sagging porch roof. To its left, the skeleton of a barn had collapsed in on itself, its spine broken. The place didn't just look abandoned. It looked defeated. It was the physical embodiment of every negative feeling I had about my own life. Forgotten, broken, not worth fixing. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the porch. The wooden steps groaned under my weight. I fumbled in the envelope for the key. It was an old, iron skeleton key, cold and heavy in my trembling hand. I pushed it into the lock. For a moment, it wouldn't turn, and a wave of panic washed over me. The thought of sleeping out here, in the cold, with whatever creatures lived in the tall grass, was unbearable. I jiggled it, pushed harder, and with a loud, grating screech, the lock turned. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a darkness that felt absolute. The air that rushed out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of dust and decay and the faint, sweet scent of rot. I stood on the threshold, peering into the blackness. This was it, my inheritance, a haunted house at the end of a lonely road in the middle of nowhere. I took a deep breath, tasting the dust on my tongue, and stepped inside, closing the door on the world I knew. The sound of the latch clicking into place felt final. I was home, or I was in a tomb. At that moment, I wasn't sure there was a difference. I used the flashlight on my phone to cut through the oppressive darkness. The beam landed on furniture draped in white sheets, making the room look like a gathering of silent, patient ghosts. Dust motes danced in the light, a miniature galaxy of neglect. I could make out the shape of a sofa, a few armchairs, a fireplace with a cold, black hearth. The floorboards creaked with every tentative step I took. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the mournful whistle of the wind through cracks in the walls. I walked through the downstairs rooms, my light beam a nervous, bouncing eye. The dining room held a long table and chairs, all shrouded. The kitchen was a nightmare from another century. A rusted hand pump stood over a dry sink, and a huge, cast-iron stove squatted in the corner like a malevolent idol. There was no electricity, no running water. The place was a relic, a fossil. The recommendation from Mrs. Gable to sell it to the county for back taxes suddenly seemed like the most sensible advice I had ever received. What could I possibly do here? This wasn't a home. It was a burden, a monument to a life of poverty and struggle that had, through some cruel twist of fate, become my own. Exhausted, cold, and overwhelmed, I went back to the living room. I pulled the dusty sheet off the sofa, sending up a choking cloud. The fabric underneath was worn and faded. I didn't care. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor, took out the thin blanket I'd packed, and lay down, pulling my jacket tight around me. I didn't bother exploring the upstairs. I didn't want to know what other horrors of decay and neglect waited for me in the dark. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old house, every skittering sound from within the walls, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I lay there, staring up at a ceiling I couldn't see, and felt the full weight of my 18 years. I thought about the other boys at St. Jude's. Some had foster families waiting. Some had scholarships to college. They had paths, however uncertain. I had a dead house in the middle of nowhere and a family history that was a single damning sentence: inability to provide care. The anger I had carried for so long, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, began to thaw into something else. Profound, aching grief. I cried. Not for the future, but for the past. For the little boy who was left behind. For the grandmother I never knew. For the parents who were just a faded photograph in a file. I cried until the exhaustion finally won, and I slipped into a restless sleep filled with dreams of empty rooms and closing doors. I woke to a pale, gray light filtering through the grime-caked windows. The house looked even more pathetic in the daylight. The wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing the dark lath and plaster underneath. The floor was stained and uneven. I sat up, my body stiff and aching from the cold and the lumpy sofa. The first coherent thought that formed in my mind was, I have to get out of here. This place was a trap. It was a physical manifestation of the dead end my life had become. I would go to the nearest town, find the county clerk's office, and sign whatever papers they put in front of me. I would take the few $100s and get on the first bus heading anywhere else. Clean break. A new start. That was the smart move. The only move. Fueled by this new resolve, I stood up and stretched. My stomach rumbled. I had a few protein bars in my bag, but I needed water. I went into the kitchen and tried the old hand pump, working the handle up and down with all my strength. After a dozen dry, squeaking pumps, a trickle of rusty, brown water sputtered from the faucet. I kept pumping, and slowly, miraculously, the water began to run clearer. It was icy cold and tasted of minerals and earth, but it was water. I drank greedily, then splashed some on my face, the shock of the cold a welcome jolt to my system. As I stood there, catching my breath, my eyes scanned the room. They landed on the mantelpiece above the living room fireplace. It was a thick, rough-hewn piece of timber, covered in a thick layer of dust. Sitting in the center of it was a small, dark wooden box. It was simple, unadorned, and locked with a small brass clasp. Curiosity, a feeling I hadn't had much room for lately, pricked at me. I picked it up. It was light. I shook it, but nothing rattled. The lock was tiny, and I had no key for it. I looked around the room and my eyes fell on a set of old fireplace tools. I grabbed the iron poker. It felt wrong, like a violation, but I was leaving this place anyway. What did it matter? I wedged the tip of the poker into the seam of the box and pried. The old wood splintered and groaned, and then the lid popped open with a sad little crack. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were two things. The first was a thick, sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written on the front in a shaky, elegant script. The second was a stack of cash. It was bound with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age. I lifted it out. They were $100 bills. Old ones, but still crisp. I started counting, my fingers clumsy and numb. 1, 2, 3. I counted them twice. Then a third time, my heart hammering against my ribs. $10,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was a fortune. It was a ticket to anywhere. It was a new beginning handed to me in a broken box. I sat down hard on the dusty floor, the money in one hand, the letter in the other. For a moment, I just stared at them, unable to process the sheer, stunning improbability of it. This changed everything. My hands were shaking as I carefully broke the wax seal on the envelope. The paper inside was thin and delicate, covered in the same spidery handwriting. I unfolded it and began to read. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, then I am long gone and you have come of age. There are not enough words in this world to tell you how sorry I am. I know you must have grown up thinking I abandoned you, that I didn't love you. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every decision I made to protect you. This money is for you. I saved it over many years, a little at a time, from cleaning houses and mending clothes for the people in town. It's not much, but I pray it is enough. Enough for you to leave this place. I want you to take this money, Leo, and I want you to run. Go to a city, go to college, build a life for yourself far away from here. Never look back. This farm, this land, it is not a gift. It is a curse. For generations, a family in this county, the Ashtons, have wanted this property. They own everything around it. Our little plot is the final piece of a puzzle for them. They will come for it. They will be charming and they will be kind. They will offer you a pittance for it, and they will tell you it is a generous offer for such a worthless piece of land. They will lie to you. Do not trust them. Do not fight them. You cannot win. They are powerful and they are cruel. They took your parents from me, and I would not let them take you too. Sell them the land for $1. Sign the papers and walk away. Your inheritance is not this dirt, Leo. It is this money. It is your freedom. Take it and live. Live the life I couldn't give you. Live for your mother and father. Please, my boy. For me. Just run. All my love, forever, your grandmother Eleanor Blackwood. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that filled my eyes. The letter was a key, unlocking a part of my history I never knew existed. I wasn't abandoned out of indifference. I was hidden out of love. The story I had told myself for 16 years, the story of the grandmother who couldn't be bothered, it was all wrong. She had been watching over me in her own way from a distance. She had spent the last years of her life working her fingers to the bone to give me the one thing she never had, a choice. The money felt heavier now, weighted with the sacrifice it represented. $10,000. It was a life raft. I could do exactly as she said. I could walk into town, find the Ashton family, sell them this cursed land for $1, and vanish. I could be in California by the end of the week. I could get an apartment, a job, start fresh. No one would know me. No one would know the boy from St. Jude's. It was a clean, perfect escape. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. I spent the rest of the day in a daze walking the property. The words of the letter echoed in my mind. This land, it is a curse. I looked at the collapsed barn, the fields choked with thorns and weeds, the house with its peeling paint and broken windows. It certainly looked cursed. It looked like the saddest place on earth. And yet, for the first time I felt a connection to it. This was where my family had lived. My parents. My grandmother. This dirt was my history. Selling it felt complicated. Her letter was a warning, a plea. She wanted me to be safe. But something else was in those words, too. A deep, simmering anger. They took your parents from me. What did that mean? The official story in my file was a car accident. A simple, tragic event. But my grandmother's words hinted at something darker. That night, sleeping on the same lumpy sofa, the choice tore at me. On one hand, there was freedom, a clear path forward, paved with my grandmother's hard-earned money. On the other, there was this place, this mystery, this feeling, deep in my gut, that running was what they expected me to do. It was what the system expected. It was what the Ashtons, whoever they were, expected. It was what my grandmother, in her fear, had wanted for me. But was it what I wanted for myself? To spend my whole life running from a past I didn't even understand. I looked around the dark, silent room. It didn't feel like a tomb anymore. It felt like a crossroads, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The easy way was to the west, toward the setting sun and a new life. The hard way was to stay right here on this broken piece of land and dig. Dig for the truth. And it's funny. Sometimes, the biggest choices in your life don't feel like choices at all. They feel like a quiet, certain pull in one direction. Have you ever felt that? That moment where your head is screaming at you to take the safe route, but your heart, your gut, something deeper, is telling you to stand your ground? That's a powerful, terrifying feeling. If you've made it this far into my story, it means you probably understand what it's like to face a moment that defines you. This community we're building here is for people who get that. People who know that sometimes, the hardest path is the only one that leads home. Now, let's get back to that dusty farmhouse and the truck that was about to pull up my driveway. The next morning, as if summoned by my indecision, a vehicle appeared at the end of the long, muddy drive. It was a brand new black pickup truck, the kind that costs more than a house in some places. It gleamed in the morning sun, a stark and modern intrusion into this landscape of decay. It rolled slowly toward the house and parked. A man got out of the driver's side. He was tall, in his late 50s, with silver hair and an expensive-looking suit that seemed wildly out of place. He moved with an easy confidence, an air of ownership. He walked up to the porch, his polished shoes carefully avoiding the worst of the mud, and stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Hello?" he called out, his voice smooth and practiced. "Anyone home?" My heart hammered in my chest. This had to be one of them, an Ashton. I took a deep breath, clutching my grandmother's letter in my pocket like a talisman, and opened the door. I stepped out onto the porch. The man looked me up and down, a quick, appraising glance that took in my worn clothes and the tired look in my eyes. A flicker of something, satisfaction, maybe, crossed his face before he replaced it with a warm, practiced smile. "You must be Leo," he said, extending a hand. "Frank Ashton. Pleasure to finally meet you. I own the neighboring properties. All of them, actually." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his hand soft. "Leo," I said, my voice coming out hoarser than I intended. "I heard you'd come of age and were taking possession," he said, his smile never wavering. He gestured vaguely at the dilapidated farmhouse. "It's a shame what's become of the old place. Your grandmother, Eleanor, she was a stubborn woman. Bless her heart. Let the place go, I'm afraid. The taxes alone are a terrible burden." He was playing the part perfectly. The concerned neighbor, the helpful local businessman, just as she'd predicted. "Look, son, I'll be direct," he continued, dropping the smile for a more serious man-to-man expression. "This property isn't worth anything. The barn's a total loss, the house would need to be torn down, and the well is probably contaminated. The county will likely seize it for the back taxes within the month. But I'd like to make you an offer. I'll pay off the tax lien for you and give you $5,000 in cash. Today. It's more than fair. It's a gift, really. A way for you to get a fresh start somewhere else. $5,000. On top of the $10,000 I already had. It was a tempting offer. $15,000 could set me up for a long time. It was the sensible choice. It was the escape route my grandmother had paid for with her life savings. I could feel her letter in my pocket, almost vibrating with the urgency of her words. Take the money and run. I looked at Frank Ashton's perfectly composed face, his expensive suit, his shiny truck. I looked at the broken house behind me, and I thought of my grandmother, cleaning houses for people like him, saving every crumpled dollar to give me a choice he was now trying to take away from me. And in that moment, the decision was made. "No, thank you," I said. The words were quiet, but they felt like a cannon blast in the morning air. Ashton's eyebrow twitched. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The mask had slipped. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice a little cooler now. "I don't think you understand, son. This isn't a negotiation. That's a charity offer." "I understand," I said, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. "I'm not interested in selling right now. I need some time to think things over." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. The friendly neighbor was gone. Now I was looking at the man my grandmother had warned me about. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a business card. "This offer is on the table for 48 hours, he said, his voice flat. "After that, I'll let the county do its work. Don't be a fool, kid. People like you don't get second chances." He placed the card on the porch railing, turned without another word, and walked back to his truck. The engine roared to life, and he sped down the driveway, spitting mud and gravel in his wake. I stood there, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I had done it. I had stood up to him. It was a small victory, but it was mine. It was the first time in my life I had ever really said no to someone in power, and it felt incredible. But as the truck disappeared, a new, cold reality set in. I had just made a very powerful enemy, and I had 48 hours to figure out why this worthless piece of land was so important to him. My grandmother's warning had been right, but her letter had created a new mystery. If she wanted me to run, why leave me the farm at all? Why not just put the deed in the box with the money and the letter? Why legally tie me to this place she called a curse? It didn't make sense. Unless there was something here she wanted me to find. Something she couldn't risk putting in that first letter, in case someone else found the box. Fueled by a new sense of urgency, I started searching the house. Not for valuables, but for answers. I went through every room, opening every drawer, checking every closet. Most were empty, or contained nothing but dust and the debris of a long-abandoned life. I felt like an archaeologist, sifting through the remains of a lost civilization. My own. In the small upstairs bedroom that I guessed had been hers, the air was different. It felt personal. A simple iron bed frame stood against one wall, a small, rickety nightstand beside it. The wallpaper here was faded floral, a touch of gentle color in a world of brown and gray. I ran my hands along the walls, tapping, listening. I checked under the mattress, which was little more than a stained canvas bag filled with what felt like old corn husks. Nothing. I was about to give up when my foot scuffed against one of the wide plank floorboards near the bed. It moved, just a fraction of an inch, but it was enough. My heart leaped. I knelt down and worked my fingers into the crack. The board was loose. I pried it up, my hands shaking with anticipation. Underneath, in the dark, dusty space between the floor and the ceiling below, was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, heavy and solid. It wasn't locked. I lifted it out. It was far heavier than the small wooden box had been. I carried it to the window where the light was better, and I opened the latches. The contents were a puzzle. On top lay a stack of old, folded documents. Property surveys, geological reports filled with technical jargon I didn't understand, and legal correspondence between my grandmother and a lawyer named Elias Vance. Underneath the papers was another, much thicker bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. These weren't sealed. This was a different kind of message. This was the whole story. I sat on the dusty floor, the afternoon sun slanting through the dirty window, and I began to read. The first letter was dated 16 years ago, just a few weeks after she had left me at St. Jude's. My dearest Leo, if you have found this, it means you did not run. A part of me is terrified for you, but another, smaller part is proud. I left you that first letter hoping you would choose safety. But I left you this box in case you chose the truth. The truth is not simple. Your parents, my beautiful son Michael and his wife Sarah, did not die in an accident. They were murdered, not with a gun or a knife, but with fear and pressure. The Ashtons have been trying to get this land since my father's day. They started by making offers, then they moved on to threats. They dammed the creek upstream, trying to dry up our well. They spooked our cattle, causing them to break fences and wander onto the highway. One night, someone cut the brake lines on your father's truck. He was a good mechanic and found it before he drove it. But he was scared. We all were. The night they died, there was a storm. Terrible one. Your father went out to check on the barn, worried about the roof. He never came back. We found him in the morning. The main support beam of the old hayloft had fallen and crushed him. The sheriff called it a tragic accident, a result of the storm and an old building. But I know better. The day before, 2 of Frank Ashton's men had been here, telling your father he should take the offer before something unfortunate happened. Your mother's heart gave out 2 days later. The doctor called it a stroke brought on by grief. I call it murder. I had to stop reading. The words were like punches to the gut. Murdered. My parents were murdered. The sterile story from my file, the car accident, was a lie. A clean, simple lie to cover up a dirty, complicated truth. I felt a rage building inside me, so hot and fierce it made me dizzy. I took a few deep breaths. My hands clenched into fists, and I kept reading. The letters were a chronicle of her 16-year war. After she ensured I was safe, placed in the system under a different last name to hide me from the Ashtons, she began her quiet fight. She didn't move away. She moved into a small, rented room in Cricklewood, the town I'd passed through. She worked menial jobs, living on almost nothing, saving every penny for me. And she watched. She documented every move the Ashtons made. She took pictures of their trucks near her property line at night. She recorded conversations with other farmers they had squeezed out. She hired a geologist with the little money she had, and that's when she found the real reason they wanted the land. I picked up the geological survey. It was dense, but I found the summary page. The words leaped out at me. Significant aquifer formation, high yield, potable water source, estimated capacity in the billions of gallons. This farm wasn't sitting on dirt. It was sitting on water, a vast underground lake in a region that was getting drier every year. The water rights attached to this land weren't just valuable. They were a gold mine. Frank Ashton didn't want to build a few houses. He wanted to own the water for the entire region, to sell it to the highest bidder, to control the lifeblood of the whole county. My family's farm was the cork in the bottle. Her final letter was written only a few months before she died of pneumonia. Her handwriting was weak, the ink shaky. Leo, I am running out of time. My fight is almost over. This lawyer, Elias Vance, he is a good man, but he is old, and he is tired. The evidence I have is circumstantial. It's not enough to put Frank Ashton in jail, but it might be enough to stop him, to expose him. That is my final hope. I have failed to get justice, but maybe I can still protect our legacy. This land is not a curse, my child. I was wrong to say that. It is our home. It is your home. What you do with this knowledge is up to you. You can take the money I saved and the evidence in this box and use it to force a massive settlement from them. Bleed them dry. Take their money and build your life. There would be no shame in that. Or you can do what I could not. You can fight. You can use this to save the water, to save this place for the community. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I have loved you every second of every day. You were never abandoned. You were protected. I sat there on the floor of that cold, empty bedroom for hours. The letters and reports spread around me like the pieces of a shattered life. My entire identity had been rewritten in the span of an afternoon. I was not the unwanted orphan, the forgotten refuse of a broken family. I was the last son of the House of Blackwood. I was the heir to a quiet, desperate war. I was the keeper of a truth that could bring a powerful man to his knees. The shame I had carried for so long, the feeling of being worthless, of being thrown away, it evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard sense of purpose. The grief was still there, a massive, hollow ache for the family I had lost twice. Once in death, and again in the lies I'd been told. But the grief was not a weight anymore. It was fuel. The choice my grandmother had laid before me was brutal. Take the money and run, not as a coward but as a survivor taking what was owed. Or stay and fight, for justice, for memory, for a piece of land that had soaked up the blood and tears of my family. Frank Ashton had told me people like me don't get second chances. Maybe he was right. Maybe you only get one. And this was mine. I found the lawyer's name in the correspondence. Elias Vance. His office was in Cricklewood. I looked at the business card Frank Ashton had left. It had his direct line. I had 2 powerful men to call. One could make me rich. The other could make me a warrior. I stood up and looked out the window, over the overgrown fields that my family had worked for generations. I looked at the setting sun, and I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to run. I was going to finish my grandmother's fight. The next morning, I walked the 5 miles into Cricklewood. The town was small, a handful of brick buildings huddled together as if for warmth. It was the kind of place where time seemed to move more slowly. I found Elias Vance's law office above the town's only diner. The sign on the door was faded, the gold leaf peeling. I walked up a narrow, creaking staircase and knocked. A voice from inside, thin and reedy, called out, "It's open." I entered a small, cluttered office that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. Books were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the floor, on the corners of a massive oak desk. Behind the desk sat a very old man. He must have been in his 80s, with a fringe of white hair around a bald head and thick glasses that magnified his pale blue eyes. He looked up at me over a stack of files. "Can I help you, son?" he asked. "My name is Leo Blackwood," I said. "I believe you knew my grandmother, Eleanor." The old man's eyes widened. He slowly took off his glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. He stared at me, really stared, as if seeing a ghost. "My God," he whispered. "Eleanor's boy. We all thought you were gone." "She hid me," I said simply. I unzipped my duffel bag and carefully lifted out the ammunition can. I placed it on his desk with a heavy thud. "And she left me this." For the next 2 hours, I told him everything. I showed him the letters, the reports, the evidence she had so painstakingly collected. He read in silence, his expression growing more and more grim. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me, his old eyes sharp and clear. "She was a remarkable woman," he said softly, "the bravest I ever knew. She fought him for years, with nothing but her own grit. Frank Ashton is a cancer on this county. He's been poisoning it for decades, but no one has ever had the courage or the proof to stand up to him." "Is this enough?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. "Is it enough proof?" Vance sighed, a long, weary sound. "To put him in prison for the death of your parents? No, it's been too long. The trail is too cold. The sheriff back then was in his pocket. It's her word against his, and she's gone. But to stop his development project? To expose him for the greedy monster he is? To bring a world of legal and financial pain down on his head?" A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Oh yes, son. This is more than enough." He laid out the options, just as my grandmother had in her letter. "With this geological survey and his pattern of intimidation, we can file an injunction that will tie up his development plans in court for years. The carrying costs alone will bleed him. He'll be desperate to make a deal. He'll offer you millions to sign a non-disclosure agreement and go away." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "It would be a life-changing amount of money, Leo. You would never have to worry about anything ever again." "Or," I prompted. "Or," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping, "we don't take the deal. We fight. We leak this information to the environmental groups, to the State Water Commission, to the press. We turn his project into a political nightmare. We use your grandmother's journals to paint a picture of him that will ruin his reputation forever. We might not win as much money in the end. It will be a long, ugly, and potentially dangerous fight. He will come after you, but we will save that water. We will honor your grandmother. We will get the only kind of justice that's left." He held my gaze, his old eyes searching mine. He wasn't just presenting legal options. He was asking me who I was. Was I the scared orphan who just wanted to survive? Or was I Eleanor Blackwood's grandson? "People like you don't get second chances," Frank Ashton had told me. But he was wrong. My grandmother had given me one, and I wasn't going to waste it on running away. "We fight," I said. The words felt right. They felt like coming home. The months that followed were a blur of legal battles and quiet, grueling work. Elias Vance was a lion in the courtroom, old but fierce. He filed the first injunction and the war began. The Ashton legal team descended, a pack of slick city lawyers who tried to bury us in paperwork. But Vance knew their playbook. For every motion they filed, he filed 2 more. Meanwhile, I went back to the farm. I used the $10,000 my grandmother had left me not as an escape fund, but as a restoration fund. I bought tools, lumber, seeds. I started clearing the land, one thorny patch at a time. I repaired the porch, replaced the broken windows, patched the roof. I worked from sunrise to sunset, my body aching, my hands raw and blistered. But every board I hammered, every weed I pulled, felt like a prayer. I was not just fixing a house. I was reclaiming my history. The community in Cricklewood, which had at first been wary of me, began to watch. The story of the fight against Frank Ashton started to spread. One day, the owner of the general store, a gruff man named Mr. Henderson, told me my credit was good there. An old farmer from down the road, a man whose own father had been squeezed by the Ashtons, showed up with his tractor and helped me plow a field. The diner started sending over a hot meal every evening. They were small gestures, but they meant the world. I had spent my life as an outsider, and for the first time I felt like I was a part of something. I wasn't fighting alone. Ashton tried to intimidate me, just as my grandmother had predicted. His trucks would park at the end of my drive at night, their headlights shining into the house for hours. I received anonymous, threatening letters. But the fear was different this time. It wasn't the helpless fear of a child. It was the sharp, focused fear of a soldier. It just made me more determined. The turning point came when Vance, in a stroke of genius, leaked my grandmother's journals to a young, ambitious reporter from the state capitol. The story exploded. Corporate greed and a family's legacy. The fight for Black Creek water, it was a David and Goliath story, and the public loved it. The State Water Commission launched an investigation. Environmental groups started protesting. Frank Ashton's name became synonymous with corporate malpractice. His partners got nervous. His funding began to dry up. Finally, he broke. He called Elias Vance and asked for a meeting. We met in Vance's dusty office. Ashton looked like a different man. He was diminished, his expensive suit looking rumpled, his confident air replaced by a weary desperation. He offered a massive settlement. It was a fortune, enough to make me and my children and their children rich. I looked at Vance and he gave me a slight nod. The decision was mine. I thought about the money. I thought about the life I could have, free from struggle. Then I thought about the clear, cold water running deep beneath my feet. I thought about my grandmother's tired, hopeful face, a face I had only ever seen in one faded photograph she had tucked into her letters. The money is not the point, I said, my voice clear and steady. The water belongs to the community. We'll take a settlement, yes, enough to restore the farm and to pay Mr. Vance for his work. But the water rights will be placed into a public land trust in perpetuity. And you will make a public statement acknowledging the Blackwood family's multi-generational stewardship of the land. It was not the deal he wanted, but it was the only deal he was going to get. He had no choice. He agreed. 1 year later, I am sitting on the porch of the farmhouse. It is no longer a wreck. It has a new roof and a fresh coat of white paint. The fields around it are not choked with weeds. They are planted with corn and beans. The collapsed barn has been cleared away, and the salvaged timber is stacked neatly, waiting to be used to build a new one. The air doesn't smell of decay anymore. It smells of damp earth, of growing things, of home. The scars are still there, of course. They always will be. There is a hole in my heart where my family should be. There are nights when the loneliness of my childhood feels like a physical weight. Justice was not perfect. Frank Ashton is not in jail. He is merely ruined. But the fight is over, and we won. They told me I owned nothing. They were wrong. I own this land, this house, this history. My grandmother left me more than just a farm. She left me a legacy of resilience. She taught me that inheritance isn't something you are given. It's something you claim. It's the story you choose to live. She gave me the truth, and the truth gave me a home. And as I sit here, watching the sun set over my fields, I think about the choices we all face. We are all, in our own way, handed a story. Sometimes it's a story of loss, of abandonment, of being told we are worthless. But that is never the only story. There is always another one, buried underneath. The story of our own strength, of our own truth, waiting to be discovered. You just have to be brave enough to dig. If this story has meant something to you, if you have ever had to fight to reclaim your own narrative, then I hope you'll join this community by subscribing. Share a piece of your own story in the comments below. Tell me about a time you chose the harder path, the one that led you back to yourself. Because every story of survival and homecoming deserves to be heard. You are not alone in this fight. We are in it together.